Okay, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get groups of schools to support each other to help. And we have, here's a typical program. This is the sort of thing we've done where you have a launch day. This is Achieving for Children, a group of schools that are based around Windsor and Maidenhead. This is one of our ongoing programs. So we have a launch day. We get all the leaders from all the schools together, something like 35 or 40 schools represented, mostly primary with some secondary. We do some virtual follow-ups. We have a follow-up day in person, another virtual follow-up. So we do a mixture of remote sessions and in-person sessions. And we find that combination works pretty well because the face-to-face is really important. It's a human business. And you can exchange and model techniques. One of the main values of the in-person is you can demonstrate how the toolkit works by acting out techniques and modeling how to do training. But beyond that, the value of remote is that if you've got 40 schools, it's obviously time consuming and inefficient for 40 people to gather in a room just to share ideas. So remote sessions are really helpful. You can get people across a big system, dialing in, hearing each other talk, and it's really useful. So the combination is how we work. So typical sessions. So the first, we talk about how the WalkThrus might work as a toolkit. So you explain the whole concept. We talk about coaching and team building, and then we show people what they have. So you sort of do an initial thing. By the time you're getting into the sort of further down the track, you're looking at more of this design decisions process that we're going to look at in a minute, and you're getting into the detail of it. So you launch, and people need time to absorb ideas and process them. And when you come back a couple of months later, you get much more sharply into it. So this is a sort of rough outline of the sorts of things we've been doing. We think we follow this stuff quite closely. We always try to educate people about the theoretical concepts that we're trying to wrestle with. So the evidence around effective professional development, and a core part of our thinking is that we're trying to deliver on all 4 sets of the mechanisms that the Education Endowment Foundation identify in their 2021 paper. So specifically dealing with the need to manage cognitive load and revisit prior learning. So building knowledge. So we try to explain how the toolkit needs to allow teachers to build their knowledge slowly over time. So we really emphasize a steady step-by-step approach, not trying too much. The need to set goals. So we introduce this whole idea of how teachers need to work towards specific goals within their practice, which leads to the structure of the cycles that we suggest that people use. And we feel we're on a bit of a mission to break down existing habits around things like formal observation, appraisal targets. We see this as old school, backward even, quite regressive kind of ideas about PD, about accountability driven stuff that happens every term. Our experience is that you can ditch all of that and things are better. So part of our mission is pull yourself away from the accountability stuff and move towards developmental high frequency stuff. Develop teaching techniques means we have to train teachers by showing them things, not just telling them about things. We've got to get them involved in a process where they feel part of it. Social support, modeling and rehearsal, all these are part of a really healthy PD process. And finally, embedding, and this is the key bit. It's very easy, even up to this point, to do a one-off event and then the whole thing falls flat. And the very hardest part at this level is embedding things in schools weeks and months and years after an initial launch period. So we have to really work through the whole system. So we think those mechanisms are very powerful as guides to what we're trying to do. And we, over time, so around about January last year, we realized that every time we went into a school, we were essentially asking the same questions. And now, rather than arriving at these decisions, we preload them. We say, let's start by looking at these decisions. And in each school we're working with, what do we need to do? And I'm going to go through these in a bit more detail in a minute. But what this now provides is a framework for lots of schools to talk about what they're doing. So let me have a look at what that means. I'll come to the 6 things in a minute. We want teachers to be thinking about their practice in relation to the cognitive science. So we start by looking at the classroom and saying, what does it look like for teachers in your school? What problems are you trying to solve? This is such an important idea. And yet, we do come across quite a lot of practice where schools are trying to implement techniques rather than solve problems. And what's the difference between those two things? Solving problems means the teacher identifies for themselves or with their team or with their phase leader or their subject leader. These are the things that we are not so good at, or the children are not so good at. Let's solve those. And that's different from saying, the Multi-Academy Trust Board has told us we are all going to do this technique. And now you might feel across your mat or your system, everybody should focus on a certain set of techniques. But even in having that thought, you have to say, well, why though? What's the reason? And it might be that your quality assurance analysis has told you that it's a common challenge whenever you visit schools, that certain things always come up. So therefore, this would be a good solution to focus on. But we need to locate the toolkit in being solutions to problems that we actually feel we have. So we always start our training with this type of thing, looking at the memory model. And then we're trying to set up a structure where a teacher is then engaged in a process of thinking that through. So the instructional coaching version of that suggests a one-to-one model where a teacher and a coach sit together. Now, when we first started WalkThrus 4 years ago, and it even says it on the books, we say it's a guide to instructional coaching. We have since realized that really it's not. It's really a guide to scaffolding professional development in a much wider sense. And most schools we go to do not yet have the capacity for every teacher to have a really good coach. They might be working towards that, but they're not there yet. And so we have to have a system which moves them in that direction or allows them to use their existing structures. So more and more, we're finding that our large-scale implementation is really about schools setting up loops of reflection with the existing people in the existing teams, with a coaching layer of thinking embedded on top of that. So your primary teachers are in year teams or phase teams, and that's their default team, and the leadership in that knows them and knows the curriculum. Your average maths teacher feels they're in a maths department where their head of maths or their leaders of maths are the main people they are talking to about their practice. Those are the embedded default structures that schools have got. And you have to do a lot of organizational hoopla to break away from those. And the more you break away from existing structures, the harder it is to sustain, we find. So, of course, there are variations on that, and some schools add layers. We'll come to that. But this is our main focus, that you're looking at. The main flow is teams of people. And the whole time what you're trying to do is develop shared understanding around what the problems are and what the solutions are. So the way that the WalkThrus works is it comes into this space between people where we allow the toolkit to scaffold our discussion around what are the problems that teachers have, what are the solutions that are available, and increasingly also what are the ways that we run training and coaching, because we've got lots of work around that. So it's like a sort of set of references, scaffolds, a toolkit for not telling you exactly what to do, but asking you questions about what's happening to develop this shared understanding between people. One of the conclusions, which I show towards the end, is where you come across schools where everyone there has got the same understanding of a technique like think, pair, share, and they're all doing it lesson to lesson to lesson to lesson to lesson. It's amazing. It really feels like movement is happening because there's such clarity. And when you've got, say, a head teacher or a middle leader from one school to the next or within one school with their own different version of everything, you always feel like it's much harder to get into the improvement cycle because we have to spend a lot of time defining things and deciding what good looks like. So the WalkThrus gives you the language for it. So what's the difference between a big system thing and just doing it school by school? Well, in any school, it's already quite complicated. You've got whole school systems. You've got to have stuff that you do across the whole school. What's the value of a whole school training session? What about the team meetings? And what about what happens with individuals? And sometimes we find schools are doing way too many different things. Or that some people are going off that training, some to that coaching program. We've got this platform, we've got that platform, we've got this platform. And it feels like everyone's working hard, but it's a bit all over the shop. And sometimes these things are clashing. So you've got an individual teacher being told this by their head of maths, this by their coach, this by their deputy head in charge of teaching and learning, this by the random SLT member who did a learning walk. And it's like, oh my God, where's the cohesion to that? And we ask schools to think about, well, what do you need to do together? What do you do in teams? And then what do the individual teachers do? Let's create some kind of organization around that so the teachers have got a clarity of focus. And then that influences the team dynamics. So a team sets up an agenda, they set up a process of observation and reality checking of how's it really going. And then they meet and reflect. And then they set a new agenda based on their re-evaluation of what they're doing. And then they go again. And this presence of the reality check, the observation with video or direct observation in between meetings, we think is just absolutely essential. So once you've got a system up and running like that, where every teacher knows that there's a regular cycle to these meetings, where there's a really clear content structure to it in terms of what we talk about, where the value of observation and video and learning walks is really clear, and the feedback structure, the way we run the meetings is really clear. We just feel like things are really motoring, because there's cycles of improvement and refining and so on. Now, where it works well, there's leadership in there and the people running those meetings know what they're doing. Where it's not so strong is where the people in those meetings are less confident with what they're doing. So we need to train people. So when you look at the detail of it, you zoom in, this is going to get crazier than this slide and the next slide. It's complicated and you have to face that complexity. You know, one school on its own has got layers of complexity, whole school things, team things, and individual things. When you're scaling that up, it's like, whoa, okay, you've got lots of schools all doing that. And this is where it all comes in. So at a system level, we have to have like real clarity now. And this is where we feel it really helps. Just in that diagram there, I mean, I've only been overfill it. There's only 9, but the schools, the systems we're working on, we've got multiple schools, so 40, 50, 60 schools working together. And why does that help? It's because it allows them to share a discussion around this complex system with the same language. They can share experiences of what they're all doing using the same reference point. They can do joint training for middle leaders about how to run the systems well and for teachers about certain techniques. You can talk about problem solving around how do you organize coaching? How do you organize training? What walkthroughs did you select? What problems are you dealing with? How do you move on once the teachers have established a platform and so on? And then you can reference the fact that there's more than one way of doing it. So within any group of schools, we found there are lots of different ways of solving the same problem. And it's good to hear alternative perspectives, which I'll come on to in a minute. But by having the same toolkit to talk about, we find that it just really helps create clarity. And without that clarity, it's a real mess. I mean, all the same complex things are happening in each school, but if you don't have the same language for discussing it, how do you even get into what's going on? So what we have is these 6 design decisions. Essentially, they describe the different stages you need to make these loops. And so in that loop there, if I just said it verbally, who are the people in each team? What are they talking about? What's the content is the second one. What's the time structure? So how far apart are those meetings and how regularly? When does the training happen to feed into this cycle, and who does it? What's the structure of the meetings in themselves? So how do middle leaders run a coaching process within those meetings? And finally, what's the nature of the reality check process that goes in between? And so those are those 6 decisions. So that's just what we found in our work with systems, that once you've established these 6 questions, now we're much more explicit about that now. When we first started, say 3 years ago on these bigger projects, we didn't ask those questions. We just sort of got going. But now we realize those were the questions we were sort of asking without giving it that framework. So that's where we're at. Now, that just to sort of show you a little bit about the flexibility. So within the teams, what we find is just huge variation. And sometimes it's within one system. So I was in a group with a group of schools last summer, a group of schools in Sheffield that shared their experience. And they were reporting back at the end of a whole year working. Now, in one school, their model was the deputy head had coached every single teacher herself, one-to-one. So it was a 2-form entry primary school. She coached every individual teacher herself. That was the model. So one-to-one coaching done by one person. And that was her model. In that same group of schools, you had the opposite, which was they all met together as a staff once every 2 weeks. So the whole staff gathered every 2 weeks, and they were coached together by a couple of senior leaders. So in a secondary school, you'll have something like the main thing is the teams, but what you'll find there is in some schools, the team leaders coach their own teams. Head of maths coaches the maths department. Science department is coached by the head of science. In other schools, they've broken them into pairs and threes, and you've got like a triad of teachers who might all be maths teachers, and they're coached by a 4th person who comes and meets them regularly every 3 weeks, and they discuss their process. So within the system, there's lots of variation, and you have to think hard about who does it and what's the permutations, and it's very context specific. A 1-form entry primary school, even a mixed age primary school, obviously totally different to a 2,000 school size secondary school with. And some of the schools we've been to, the head of science has got 25 people in their science department. It's a totally different beast. They've got more people in their department than some primary schools have in their whole school. So the scale and the structures need to adapt to the school context. So you can't impose a generic system on a whole set of schools. You've got to have a common language for each school to come up with its own system with the people they've got. You can't coach people with people you don't have. You've got to grow the people to do the coaching. The next big variation is a teaching and learning focus. And this is just, for me, one of the brilliant things about the toolkit. So let me just to really clear about this. We encourage schools to have a kind of a core set of techniques. And so one of our strong teams of people is the Surrey schools, SAFE. It's called Schools Achieving for Excellence, SAFE. And in this folder, they have put their clusters of techniques. And this is just one of the many groups of schools that have shared their cluster. If I search in my drive for, say, Leicester LPP, Leicester Primary Partnership, I've got a group of clusters from them. And these are groups of schools all working on WalkThrus, and each one of them, they share their techniques. And it's a really good way of sharing what they're focusing on. Here's one I particularly like, because I just like the thinking here. Spinney Hill, it's a primary school, 2-form entry primary school, I think. And their focus this year is, well, they've decided to have 3 clusters: checking for understanding, establish expectations, retrieval practice, and cold calling, probing questions, establish your expectations, and silence is golden. These are there are specific reasons for that. And interestingly, in their case, they wanted to focus on multiple choice questions for retrieval practice, because they felt it was a very time efficient way of checking. Like, do you know this? Check, and then they can engage more quickly with the fact that some of the children don't know the right answer and what to do about that, rather than lots of going through the answers. And they felt that was a good thing to focus on. Anyway, they had a reason. Now, So each school in these groups has their own cluster. It isn't like a central cluster. And you do have to be a bit careful about that, because our experience has been where teachers have had some say in the design of their cluster. So let's have a look at another one. They feel it belongs to them. So we encourage schools to put their name on it. And that one's not coming through there, but I think my internet is, there it is. And it's this toolkit that is flexible, but each teacher at the school has got their own. Now, in some multi-academy trusts we've worked with, they've tried to create a kind of mat cluster, which can be useful, provided that the techniques are identifiably solving the problems each individual school feels they have. It can feel, because we always go into schools at the bottom end and talk to the teachers and talk to them about how they experience the structure. And sometimes they complain that they've been told to do things. And that's how it feels to them, rather than they've been invited to solve the problems they have with this toolkit. So you've got to be careful about what message you're giving and whether it's the message you want to be giving. So autonomy and commonality, you've got to be careful. It's very easy for a group of middle leaders, a senior leaders, to sit around a table and say, everyone needs to do this. and then it's much less likely to stick than if the teachers themselves have designed it. But yeah, so this is the kind of approach we have. It's brilliant, but the thing is, every time someone says cold calling, you know what it means. Another big variation is the time structure. So you could, like, I remember surveying the Haringey schools when we first started, and we had some people said they were meeting every week. They didn't. I think the two most common options were every 6 weeks and every week. Wow, okay. So it wasn't like a neat distribution. Every 6 weeks was quite a common option, and in that situation, I'd be saying, "Well, why? What are you doing the other weeks? Like, do it more often." And I think that was the director of Chapel. And every 1 week was, "Are you really able to drop in and all your teachers between each session every week?" And sometimes people said, "Yeah, we do. That's what we do. We have a meeting. We do learning walk during the week. We have a meeting. They're really intense every week for 15 minutes." So there are different models, and it's important to work with schools to solve the problems with the people they have, the timetables they have, but encourage them to get to this sort of zone of, we always think 2 to 4 weeks is optimal, because it gives you time to observe each other well and to feedback and act on the things you've agreed. Once it is 6, 7 weeks, it's a bit long. The training, like, how do we do training? More and more, we think this is important. What we've found is when there's been great training at the centre, everyone knows what think, pair, share really looks like. Everyone knows what say it again better really looks like. The teachers are then much clearer in their head. Their mental model for that technique is stronger when they go into the classroom to do it, and it's better. So when does the training happen? Who does the training? How do we run training is another thing to think about. And some of our bigger systems where we think there's been success is where the training has been strong for the teachers, and sometimes therefore for the leaders of the teachers. The sixth, this is one of the models of how it works. So you might have the structure of, this is a school where they do every 4 weeks. They start, and then every 4 weeks they have a review, and the evaluate is like, do we move? So that's actually, although it doesn't show it on there, 8-week cycles. After the start, it's then 8 weeks with a review in the middle. And so there are 4 of them in the year. So the school has divided their calendar into 4 cycles of 8 weeks with some gaps. And that gives them 4 kind of units of time to focus with a mid-review. So it's 4 weeks apart, these meetings. That's that type of clarity that you're trying to get schools to engage in. When do those meetings happen in the week is another discussion. And we do a lot of this nitty-gritty work of when in the day do the teachers meet? When in the week do they meet? How many meetings a term do you devote to this professional development process? The coaching process is the 5th decision. And again, where we find systems have gone for let's all do it like this, it's really clear. So we advocate the Banbrick Santoyo instructional coaching process, and we're big fans of that. And it links to the, there it is, it links to the observation. So when you're observing a lesson, rather than just sort of clipboarding it or, heaven forbid, judging the lesson and saying whether it was good or not. I mean, that's the dark days. We're thinking, right, okay, how am I going to feed back to that teacher? And now we have a structure for that, and we use the Bambrix and Toyo 5 Ps process. We think, what precise praise might I give that teacher? What probing questions might I ask? How do I identify the problem and the action step? How might we practice those techniques I need to work on? And let's plan ahead with clarity about those steps and record that. So lesson observation changes when you know what's going to happen as a result. If your focus in that lesson is, I need to write this up on a 2-page pro forma because the MAT board is going to ask me to see it 3 times a year, it's a totally different beast than if you're saying this is a genuinely developmental process and I'm preparing for the discussion I'm going to have with you. And again, we feel that schools give each other the courage to do the right thing around this and move away from stick-driven approaches to kind of professional development-driven processes. And the Bambrix and Toyo approach really helps. It's got nice clarity to it. And it links into this whole thing of reality checks. We need teachers to embrace learning walks, video observation, peer observation that's structured, so that you've got eyes on the practice and people who are helping teachers to see what's really happening in their lessons without it feeling like a judgment. And a lot of people find this, a tricky road to go down. We have to support them to make those changes and change those sort of default positions. You go to a lot of schools where the teachers are still absolutely flinching when you walk in the door because they're expecting to get judged. And others where it's like, come on in, guys, everyone in, yeah, come and see come, welcome to my world. Look how hard this is. So the reality check process needs discussion. How do you use video, for example? What are the protocols? We just done a partnership with Iris Connect, so you can use Iris, and also with StepLab. So StepLab and Iris allow you to use walkthroughs within them, and that's a lot of some of the mats we're using are StepLab mats, some are Iris mats, using walkthroughs inside their package so that these ideas will link. So, to give you a flavour, when we see this working, this is a school in Manchester, they've got a cluster of techniques in the English department. They've got a structure to the way that the head of department runs their meeting: praise, probe, steps, practice, plan. They're planning their meeting. There's clarity to the process. There's clarity to the action steps, and it works really well. So, I'm going to click through all of those things. This is another common issue that we feel, that once you've got your techniques, the big thing that drives improvement is teachers knowing the steps. We still find this is the big gap. If I'm a middle leader in a school, do I know what check for understanding looks like in the classroom? It's not just a name, check for understanding. It's not just think, pair, share as a concept I have in my own head. It's these are the steps of think, pair, share. And this is what a really good process would look like. And I'm going to use that as a frame for evaluating what I see and discussing with a teacher. So zooming right in on the action steps, we still find a lot of leaders don't do that enough. They're too macro in their view. And you still find even a head teacher or a deputy head in charge of teaching and learning will talk vaguely about questioning techniques rather than talking about making sure each pair in a pair share talks during the pair share, like the real detail of how to improve. And we feel that until you get into those details, you're not really improving things. You're just talking about improving them. So your commitment to the action steps is the driver of the whole thing. And then, so that comes back to the shared understanding. The whole purpose of the structures is so that teachers really get into the detail of knowing the steps, knowing what it should look like to do it well. And everything we do across the whole system with like 40 schools in where all the heads are in a room is all drilling down to the individual teachers in each of their schools, having this clarity about precise steps. So we have to think big and small in the same time so that we're really getting to the detail and affecting individual teachers. So just to sum up from me, then I'll take questions. Here are some of the essentials. We feel like you need to get into the detail. You need to make sure schools have got the structures, the times, the meetings, that they are iterative across the year. We really think you need to have a coaching model that everyone understands. It's really helpful if every teacher knows what you mean by precise, praise, probe, action steps. If you use a different model, you need to be clear about what that one is. And then to do that well, the coaches themselves need training. So a really good activity with some maths is, or some of the biggest systems we've used, is to train all the coaches. They all gather together. We do a whole training session just for the people doing the coaching or the middle leaders. So that, we think that's essential, a layer of activity that helps schools to each have a really clear structure, a clear coaching model, and trained coaches. Pitfalls. Don't assume people have time for coaching. They don't. No one finds time. They have to be given the time. When I say no one, what I mean is it's ad hoc. So you'll go to a school where some people find the time and some people don't find the time. So it's not enough to drive the school forward because it's ad hoc. Number two is a massive issue. We find this happens time and time again. The need for the centre to have accountability kills the entire spirit of the enterprise. So they just say, so just to make sure it's happening, I want everyone to fill in this form. So everyone just thinks the whole thing of this WalkThrus program is just to fill in these forms. We've come across that many times. So we have to say the workload on this is right in the background. The form filling is just a light touch thing for the leaders themselves. And then don't assume everyone knows the techniques. They won't. Be explicit about every detail. In Think, Pair, Share, what's the first thing you do? Does everyone have a talk partner? Does everyone do that in a school automatically? No. Our experience is they absolutely, definitely don't. You go to a lot of lessons where the teacher just forgets to check everyone has a talk partner, then asks people to turn to their partner, and they don't have partners. It's all very vague. So that kind of thing of clarity and real sharp focus on the real details of teaching. Don't assume it's patronizing for people. It isn't. It's just the day-to-day reality for people. The coaching essentials. We have to talk about developing the teacher's understanding of the problems they need to solve. So we need to get teachers to understand the problem before they understand the solution. Why do we need to do this? So our mantra is ask, don't tell. What do you think you need to do? What do you think the challenge is? What do you think could improve it? And then once the teacher's discussing it, then you say, well, here's the solution. So we're not just giving feedback to teachers, we're supporting them to think through their process. But at the same time, if you see issues, you have to tell people about them. So in a skillful way. So if you notice that the children are not doing that task well, then you have to bring that into the conversation, but not at the beginning of it, but as part of the discussion, framed as a challenge the teacher has, not a criticism of them. So you say, that's interesting. Some of the thing I noticed is I noticed some of the children are finding that hard. What might you be doing about that? So training coaches to be skillful in the way they raise questions with teachers so that the teacher feels they're in the driving seat, we think is key. And just thinking, I would just tell them, we find this doesn't work very well. And last of all, avoid coaching feeling like top-down lesson feedback in disguise. Oh my God. It's just so common. It's not just like we've dropped lesson observation and now we're doing coaching and it feels exactly the same to the teachers. It shouldn't do. It should feel like we're being supported on a professional journey and I get asked what I think. Don't be vague about the action steps. Write them down, be clear what they are, make sure they're things a teacher could do. Like, this is your action step. It should read like an action. I'm going to do this, this, and this. So things like, I'm going to think about my questioning. It's not an action. It's too vague. It's got to be, I'm going to do that thing with that class. And finally, don't assume it makes a difference. You have to check. So a big part of the system leadership is Go back after the launch, go back after the training, go back after the discussion and see what's happening and feedback back to everyone saying, do we now see those techniques coming through in the teaching? Because if we're not seeing it come through in the teaching, it hasn't happened yet. And this is a big check, a big verification process needs to happen. So you've got to feed that back in. Why are we finding this so hard? And that's one of the things that we've discussed a lot with some of our big system leaders is, how do we know if it's working? You have to get in there. There's no data you can collect. There's no like form filling that'll do it. You've got to get in there and see it. Otherwise, that's really the only true way. Of course, you can look at outcomes down the track, but initially, it's a long time to wait for the outcomes to shift. You've got to get in there and observe it. So look, that's the kind of general input. I wonder if I could just, Fran, if I could come to you, is that okay to talk a bit about the HEP?
Yeah.
And I'll big you up first.
No, don't do that.
Haringey Education Partnership was our first big project. And your instinct was to do this 3 years ago. So I just wanted to share people a little bit about your journey with WalkThrus.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. You know, it's an absolute integral part of what we do. So Haringey Education Partnership isn't a MAT, and we're not a local authority either. We're a group of 115 schools across Haringey and Enfield in London, and we are growing our membership as well. And we deal with specifically leadership, curriculum, and pedagogy. So when we were set up by a group of head teachers, of which I was one at the time, to really look at focused, high-quality school improvement. And like I say, we're a membership model. And we were really looking at, okay, if we're focusing on leadership, curriculum, and pedagogy, and then bringing things into the centre, looking at it through those lenses, we really wanted something that we could kind of nail our colours to the mast to. So in terms of looking at pedagogical development for teachers, WalkThrus was an absolute gift as far as we're concerned, because it is a toolkit model. It's not a program or a curriculum that you need to impose, and it can be used once schools and practitioners and teachers and leaders get their heads around it. It can be used at so many different levels simultaneously, and you know, it is there, it gives that shared and rooted understanding. And it's also based and gave an opportunity, particularly back three and a half years ago now, as a way into all of that kind of cognitive science that was just coming to the fore as well. And that kind of gave teachers a really easy but deep access point to that. So when we first came across the first WalkThrus book, Tom, I tweeted you, didn't I? It started with a tweet. And that's really kind of what we wanted, was to be able to have a shared approach to the development of pedagogical techniques at that point. And so 50 of our schools back in 2020, 2021, all we kind of negotiated, we bought a group subscription for those schools, which meant that we all had an absolute shared understanding and common language with which to speak. And it started off with a kind of a launch event, and schools really starting to understand what WalkThrus could do for them. And if I kind of fast forward to where we are now, obviously schools evolve in so many different ways across that period of time. You have changes in staff, you have new learning, different approaches. But all of our schools, when we talk about pedagogy, we're all talking the same language. And through every single one of Tom's iterations of how this could be used in schools, we've got those schools within our group. So we've got about 85 WalkThrus subscribers now, but all using it in similar but different ways. And what we loved about it is it could be used at a system level, at a school level, at a departmental level, and an individual teacher level, all at the same time. And some of our schools will drive that through instructional coaching. Others have kind of taken on different ways of doing things. Most of our schools, like Thomas showed with those clusters, have used kind of core clusters, brilliant basics, if you like, or their teaching and learning policy is at the heart of their teaching and learning policy, and they have absolute fidelity to that. But the way that we've been able to kind of keep that system together, we're not all we don't have the expectation that all schools are doing exactly the same thing at exactly the same time and have exactly the same approach. But what we can do is some really common things to stop that lethal mutation, to stop it kind of being diluted, and to keep having that focus. So we've got kind of clusters of schools within our partnership who are using instructional coaching in small groups or one-to-one, and they are really good at working together. We've got other schools that are kind of working on developing their teaching and learning policy, so they're brilliant basics, and which kind of walkthroughs are for them, and it's very much practitioner led in that sense. And we have other kind of areas where we use it with our ECTs. We run an enhanced ECF offer, and we use walkthroughs as part of that. And, you know, we've got somebody who works with us in our team a day a week who has been seconded out of the school to actually keep the momentum going with these kind of projects, and to also provide additional training. So schools can then revisit. So we call it our delving deeper support. So we'll delve deeper into cold calling. So teachers, leaders can attend those sessions and really, again, kind of revise and revisit cold calling, or it might be think, pair, share, or it might be silence is golden. So we run those on a rolling program, and teachers and leaders from any schools or any of the clusters that we're working with can actually kind of attend those. We also run drop-in clinics for teachers and leaders as well who want to, and they're kind of mainly attended by leaders, where they can come with their sticky problem, and you might have 2 or 3 leaders or teachers or schools in those clinics, where they kind of debate out some of the sticky problems that they're having with any walkthroughs or implementation. It might be around instructional coaching, it might be around unseen observations, it might be around using walkthroughs with teachers who are perhaps on a support plan, in order to kind of move that on. So there's lots of just ways of adapting, but it's really important, I think, when you're working in clusters or you're working across a system, to have homegrown experts that can access those kind of touch points, and just keep the system going together. And we have Matt working with us who I do steal a bit of his time from Tom periodically to work on some of our bigger projects where we've perhaps had a school that's joined us because they're in a really difficult position because of an inspection, for example. And this is their vehicle for improving pedagogy in effect. So it's really evolved over the last 3 years, but for us, it's really making sure that we can keep our schools together. We're not all doing the same thing. We don't insist on that. We don't have that absolute, you have to do it like this and it can't be done any other way. Our real focus has been on making sure that schools really understand the thinking behind walkthroughs, what it's trying to achieve as a toolkit. And we keep going back to classrooms are complex places, and the memory model, that kind of that is the one thing that everybody does, or and kind of sticks to. So every kind of iteration. Sorry, Tom, go on.
No, I think I say it's what I think is interesting with Harringay is the diversity within it as well. It's like a combination of schools working their own way, finding their own way, as well as a common ground. So when you meet a group of head teachers or teachers within the Harringay schools, you'll see. So, for example, one of the models that came up early on was a teacher realizing that she preferred coaching in pairs than individually. So she said, what I find has worked well is I meet the 2 Year 6 teachers in my office. Previously, I used to try to talk to them on their own, but now I coach them together, because then they'll carry on the conversation afterwards. They hear me coach each other. I use this system and I know which walkthroughs they're working on. Another school where the deputy head coaches everyone, but he said, in this loop, I observe them. In the second loop, they observe each other. And he helps them to observe each other through providing cover. So they're creative. They're reporting back to the centre saying, how do I do the reality check process? How do I do the coaching process? And always, which walkthroughs are we working on? So one of my favourite examples from HEP is actually the school where, which is where Nat Hussain, who now works.
Yeah, Eldon. Yeah.
5 form entry primary school in Enfield. And they really worked on a couple of techniques, a whole school, big school, working on just think, pair, share, and say it again better for quite a long time to get that embedded day in, day out. And they felt that was the way to go. And the language there of what is say it again better, how to do it well, and the way Nat created her training resources then she shared that with other people. Then this is what's been really useful. So I think what HEP model is that thing of collective action, shared process, but not mandating things.
And I think, Tom, that's been so powerful. We've just started doing, Nat did one this morning, actually. It was actually a peer review, because peer review is quite strong. We facilitate peer review. And a couple of schools have actually done peer review on WalkThrus, the use of WalkThrus to improve pedagogy and therefore outcomes for children. And we're seeing it really strongly. And when our teachers come together for other kinds of training, what is so powerful is that the common language they have across the system. So it's not about getting too hung up when you're kind of working at a system level on kind of trying to micromanage. It's more about the philosophy and the fidelity and really understanding those core techniques that are going to shift practice in those individual schools, and then bringing together the schools that are doing things in a similar way to learn from each other, and then kind of cross-fertilizing. So I think the reason that WalkThrus is still so prominent 3 years on in this system is the time that's been dedicated to keeping things going and making sure that there's kind of consistency and fidelity, and that there's always someone to come back to when you've got questions, really.
Well, yeah, that's exactly, and it's that common spirit. So we have had some other projects. So, and again, even there's variation between them. So a big group of schools in Reading, a big group of schools in Surrey, a big group of schools in Birmingham, and I could keep listing them. And this is they're of a similar thing, where it's a voluntary group of schools where they join up for the school improvement support and professional development. Where we've had multi work with mats, you do also see the same variation, where mats are at different stages of size. Some mats are quite small, some are very large, and the degree of kind of center control is a bit more varied there. So none of the large projects at schools, which are the kind of professional organization like HEP, has the power. They don't have the structure to mandate things. So the schools are autonomous. But with the mats, you do find that sometimes it's helpful to have a strong center of like this is the way we do things. And that can help, provided that the techniques are well chosen to be really core ones, like questioning techniques. And there are some schools where they've done some quite creative use of their WalkThrus built into their existing framework for teaching and learning. And so you find some schools link it to Rosenshine's principles of instruction. Some have linked it to Dylan Williams' 5 strands of formative assessment. Sometimes people are using the great teaching toolkit and saying, well, here are the WalkThrus that underpin that. We've had all sorts of people showing us how the WalkThrus have linked to a framework. And we wouldn't encourage people to reinvent those things. Just the WalkThrus just help you deliver your existing program and to create that shared language for how to do certain techniques and get that clarity. So I'm going to share. I've been asked in the chat about slides. What I'm going to do is we're going to put the slides onto our website later. But one of the things that, if you're, this is an open webinar for people who want to join from anywhere. And obviously, if you're not yet a member of the WalkThrus family, we can call it that, the first thing is to do that, to discuss that with your people and say, join. And yes, there's a subscription. And then, of course, at a mat level, it's a really super discounted. We have some quite large mats where every single teacher in the whole mat has access to WalkThrus, and sort of per head of people, it's really good value compared to each teacher school doing it. So that's for the first question. And once you're an access to that, then you'll be able to access all the slides and stuff I've just shown you. There's a really good question here. How do you manage whole school priorities versus individual teacher actions? And that's a really good question. So to answer that, I'm going to go back to this slide. This is one of the slides. That's such a great question. This comes up all the time, and teachers have got so much in common, and yet, of course, they have their own individual things. So the way we would say that is, first of all, remember that a lot of teachers have common issues. So what are the things which everyone has in common as a challenge? Securing attention, questioning, behavior management routines, And it can be really powerful in a school to say, we all want all our children to talk every day, all the time, in a structured way. So think, pair, share is going to be nailed on as a technique in our school. So welcome to our school. You need to know how to do think, pair, share really well, following the school protocol, because then it's going to be easier for you and better for the children. So your whole school process might be, we're going to do think, pair, share, and some routines for behavior, and that's whole school. But in the teams, primary school, a year one team does not have the same exact curriculum issues as the year 6 team. Art teachers in a secondary school do not have the same exact issues as the physics team, science team. So team processes are going to have a slightly different focus, but within that, they know the whole school one. They're not separate. The art department knows that they're doing think, pair, share, and signal, pause, insist, whole school. And in art, we're also using success criteria, because that's really helpful for getting the children to see what standards look like. Within that, the teacher then says, well, what about me? What are my needs? I've got to deliver on all of those issues that are whole school and all of those issues that are team. And I might personally be finding that bit of it difficult. I'm personally struggling with think, pair, share with my class, because I'm not quite sure how to get them all doing it. Some of them don't speak to each other. That's my challenge with my class in delivering that agenda. So within a whole school framing of the main priorities, an individual teacher will have their different needs. So that's how you deal with it. It's not helpful to tell that teacher to do 3 other things as well, in addition to the whole school things. They haven't got time to fight lots of. So it's helpful if there's alignment. That's basically what I'm saying. Try to create a system so that team agendas align with whole school agendas, and then individual agendas align with those, and then it's reinforcing. But you're not saying this week, all of you, your action step is this. That's way too centralized. Fran, sorry, hand up.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think it's always really, really important to remember that this just gives a framework for things that you already do. So but take WalkThrus out of the picture just for the moment. In any typical school, you might have a teaching and learning policy, and there'll be different ways that you approach certain things. Like you might have a behaviour policy, a way for managing classroom behaviour. You have those kinds of things anyway, and that is your kind of your whole school processes piece. And then in year 3, we might be working on whatever it is, or year 7 or whatever it is. And then, when the senior leaders in my school do kind of quality assurance and they do come and observe me teach, they'll never walk away without giving you a next step. And this is how you've kind of got to see it. WalkThrus just gives you a framework and some concrete examples of how to actually work on those things. So, for example, if I was being observed and my line manager said to me, you really need to kind of put on those higher ability children, and then they'd walk away. Whereas WalkThrus gives them a vehicle to say, I think some of the higher ability, there's a little bit of a lack of challenge for those more able children. Let's have a look at this walkthrough. And there is your kind of answer for your individual processes. So it's not seeing it as anything different. This whole school processes, the team processes, and individual processes exist within a school's kind of development and quality assurance and CPD anyway. It's just using kind of walkthroughs and a shared and common understanding of walkthroughs to be able to deliver that. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, exactly, and that's great. So it's actually one of my most favorite jobs is to do the days where we are doing this. I'll click through my slides to get to this thing where you've got all the schools together. They're just magnificent. So you've got representatives from all the schools, and they're all saying, okay, so here's my school, and they're sharing. They've got a language for sharing with their partner. Like, I've got this teacher, how do I support them? And this is the problem solving you can get into, because the toolkit allows you to think about that. And we've got various nice features, like if I show you on the website, one of our most popular features these days when we log into it is the problem solution tool. So we've got a couple of things I'll just briefly show you here. One of them is this getting started guide. So if I just quickly show you this, this is exactly what Fran said. Share the rationale, You know, what's the why are we doing it, and explain the concept of walkthroughs. It's not a new thing, it's not a fad, but none of the ideas in the walkthroughs are invented new. We're not saying they are. They're just the same things you've been talking about, but now we've got a kind of structure for them so you can refer to it. Then we talk about which techniques you're going to select. We help people choose that focus. And the last thing is the how. This is the powerhouse of it, really. It's how to model the techniques, how to run training sessions, how to run these CPD cycles, and how to train the leaders on giving feedback. The last bit at the bottom is to see it through. This is the hard bit. You've got to get stuff up and running, but then you have to have loops back round. And some of the system leaders I've spoken to said this is the bit they're finding. As a person in the centre, how do I get into all the schools? Well, you can't, but you can visit some, you can sample some, and you can get other people to report back on how well things are going, and then bring their challenges to a central session to talk about it. So you have to have some way of sampling the practice in your system, so you're getting a feel of the run through of the whole thing into the classrooms. And we have had some really great feedback. Oh my God, the last visit around the schools, I was seeing so many teachers using these techniques, and that's kind of what you're hoping is going to be happening. So that's the first thing I want to show. The next thing is the cluster toolkit. So we've got more and more ways of schools identifying what to focus on. So we have one link to formative assessment, one link to Rosenshine, one link to SEND. But the more general problem solution tool is this one, where we have a whole range of questions, which it starts off by looking at the classroom, and then you say, here are some common things that teachers experience, challenge. What do I do about it? So students will struggle to complete tasks independently. I click on there, and it's some suggested techniques that you might explore. Guided practice, independent practice, for example. Or how do I explain ideas effectively? There's walkthroughs on giving an explanation, using analogies, dual coding. And so we've tried to create tools where there's a question and an answer. But the answer is a set of techniques, which then each of which has to be explored one by one. So we wouldn't recommend you do lots and lots of walkthroughs. You're always focusing on a few, but we're trying to help you craft kind of a set which solves the problems you see in your system. But as I keep coming back to, teachers have more in common than they imagine. So we often find that when you visit several schools in the same group, the challenges are very, very common. Okay, so other questions. How do we support staff in their worry about the use of videoing? Well, I think there are protocols. The first thing is that you just let them, they have to choose. The main thing is you can't make anyone video their lesson. You have to invite them to, and then they watch it on their own, and then they use it for self-reflection first. That's the first thing. You literally can't force someone to video their lesson without their consent. So you've got to, let's say, well, watch it, see what you think, and then invite them to select a part of the video for you to watch. So that's really important that they can choose the section they want and do it very low stakes, one-to-one. Then I give them a choice. Do you want me to be there? Do you want to be there when I watch it? Or do you want me to watch it on my own? And all of those things, the teacher has the control. So that's the way. You have to maximize the teacher's ownership of it. And then they start building up the confidence. No one's going to send you a video where they think they look terrible or they were rubbish. They're going to send you one where it was kind of as good as they'd want it to be. Another way is to model yourself. So I've seen schools where they say, well, here's me. Watson, I know this teacher, he's great. He showed a bit of himself teaching maths to his colleagues. And he just said, look, it's not the best teaching you've ever seen, but let's have a look at it. What am I doing well? What could I improve? And he modeled being the critique. It was good. So you have to model it, get it going. Any suggestions to a school that has been using the walkthroughs as the basis for coaching about how to elevate the process and not become stagnant? Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I think what you need to do is use the problem solution tool and say, well, what does stagnant mean? Is it because they're not improving anymore? Is it because they perhaps need to look at other areas? And it's a bit like if you're practicing, I mean, I've got a piano here. When I used to learn the piano, sometimes you get stuck on a piece, you feel, I'm not getting any better at this. So you just park it for a while. and you just like try something else. Just let's have a look at this other area, and it refreshes your interest, and and then you go back to that later. That's what it's like. You can't just bang, 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 bang. It becomes a bit drudge. So look at some of the slightly more niche areas in the practice, and that's what I would do. So see it as a long-term game. You're not going to master this all now. You're going to develop that a bit, then develop that a bit, then develop that a bit, and then we come around again, and then we're getting better and better. So mix up the agenda so it's interesting, but not so many things that it's overwhelming. It's a subtle balance, but I would definitely do that. Sometimes you just need to park things and move on and just try something else. Absolutely. To be honest with you, though, there are some schools I've been to where they'd kill to be in the stagnant phase. Like they just getting to that point where we've done it quite a bit is an achievement. So just to be at that point where let's move on at another level is a good place to be in a way, because you feel like that's see it as a positive that we need to move on. That's a nice feeling. Across the trust, I love to begin to explore the peer review. What experience have you had in? So this is a really good thing. Peer review is all about precision of the techniques and the teachers having a language for the critique, which is where the Banbrick Centoio comes in. Precise praise. So I observe you. I've got my precise praise, probe, action steps. I say, I love that bit of the lesson where you did this, because some of the things I noticed were this, and we discuss it. So the probing is prompted by the structure, so that they don't just go, oh, you were great. No, you were great. No, you were great. So the pitfall of peer coaching is that there's no real coaching going on. It's just stroking and niceness. You have to ask the hard questions, and peers sometimes just find that hard. So, okay, let's probe. What are the challenges that you had in the lesson? And you do it that way. So you've got to have a really good structure for that. What are the problems that you had in the lesson? Then the peer coaching starts to have some teeth to it, some meat to it. So you have to train people to use that system. If you don't train people to use that system, they spend a lot of time being nice to each other, and it doesn't happen. So, but I definitely think it's good. The other thing you said, there are barriers such as staffing or worse, the competitiveness of schools not treating the process collegiately. Well, yeah. If you're talking about peer review from school to school, I think there's, if I've misunderstood the question, I think that's about, yeah, I mean, people's behaviours are hard, aren't they? I think you need to be objective about what they're saying. So do it together. So I would never allow someone to come into my school and just tell me. I would go with them. And we always do that. So we are strictly non-judgmental. When we go in as WalkThrus consultants to a school, we never leave them telling them what they did well and what they did badly. That's not our job. We say, here's some things we observed in the lessons. What might be some solutions to that? And we offer solutions to the challenges, but we're with the teachers all the time. So the peer review process has to be with the people. So you're saying, we're triangulating, we observe this. And what we find is, we almost always agree, not always, but we nearly always agree with the people with. What did you notice in the lessons? Yeah, we saw that. What would you say to the teachers? What WalkThrus might be a solution? So you're agreeing from the beginning, because that's the whole purpose. So I feel that's important. We're not critiquing them, but sometimes we offer suggestions which they don't always want to hear. Like, you know, how often are you meeting as a staff? And if they say, well, once a half term we have a meeting, and sometimes say, well, do you think that's enough? And the answer is no. So you're asking questions. So a good peer review process from school to school is about asking questions, not telling them what your judgment is. So hopefully that's useful.
That's not in there, Tom, a minute. On the
Sorry.
peer review bit. It's what because we've got quite a clear framework for facilitated peer review, and it all comes through in the contracting of that between leaders of the schools that kind of peer reviewing each other, and that's where the kind of the barriers bit of staffing and worse, the competitiveness of schools not treating the process collegiately. So it's quite a solid framework about that, and the contracting meeting that happens ahead of it, and it's being really clear about what question do you want answering. So it's being very, very explicit. So Joe, I'm really happy to talk kind of further on that, because it's something we've worked really, really hard on to make sure that we can we can do peer review with things like walkthroughs and curriculum and all the other things, but it is in that it's in that collegiate way, and the competitive interplay doesn't affect that. But it is around the kind of the contracting and being incredibly clear, and it's about the framework, and I'm really happy to share that with you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. But use the structure. So what I would always encourage structures for review. So what's your which teams are you using? Use that framework, for example. What's your cluster of techniques? Does it solve the problem? Why are you using those techniques? Sometimes schools are trying to do too many things. Sometimes the clusters that they've chosen, the techniques they've chosen, don't seem to match the reality you see in the lessons. Like, why are you worried about that when this is the thing we see when we come here? Like, you ask them the question and they say, well, yeah, maybe we should do that instead. Sometimes schools feel like it's a sort of a kind of badge of honor to go through things. Like, literally in like the first year, when we first introduced the second book, we had schools telling us, we haven't finished the first book yet. How can you be introducing a new one? And we'd be saying, no, you don't, like, work your way through the book. There's 50 more techniques in it. Like, so it's not better to do more techniques. Sometimes it's worse because you're not really improving any of them. So having that balance of some of the techniques being in the background as general knowledge, sort of helping teachers think about their practice broadly, but a focus on those specific ones you're doing day-to-day, really working on, is better. So asking them about that, asking them about their system. And where schools need help, we often find it's to do with the middle leaders, the caliber, well, that sounds a bit judgmental, the kind of the knowledge and confidence of the middle leaders and the way they observe lessons. So a really helpful review process is to go into a school with the other leaders and say, let's look at some lessons together and compare notes and then discuss. So we've identified these challenges. How do you run the training that follows from this and talk it through? How would you run? What will be the consequences now? When's the next meeting going to be? And really sort of try to work through with them. How do we go from observing a teacher's practice through to that teacher doing it better? What's the system? And often what you find when you're talking to each other is the system's a bit vague. It's not going to move them on. And, we found that with, say, for example, when schools overuse the shout out feature of Step Lab at the expense of the coaching conversation. Like they don't do that enough. They just think they can just be nice and positive very frequently about practice they've seen. But you're saying, well, that's nice, but the conversation, that coaching conversation, you have to make sure that's the bit that you're having. And sometimes they've undercooked that bit and they're not using the platform to its full potential because they're just using the sort of easy bit, which they can just do kind of whenever they're ready. And we find that, that type of thing is interesting. Or with, say, Iris, what you found is they start talking about using Iris and then you realize, yeah, but that's only 6 people. You've got 40 teachers. What about the others? And so you realize that, again, they've got this platform, but they're not using it with everyone. They've just got this like select group of people who are getting a good process. And they talk about that. You think, well, okay, coaching 6 people out of 40 isn't going to improve your school, is it? It's sort of, you've got to have a structure which engages everybody in a process within which that 6 might be getting an extra dose. And that type of thinking is useful to reflect back to people, we find. Okay. There's just a couple of other questions. How many aspects can you effectively work on the school at a time? I think I'm going to say like 6 to 8 maximum. I feel like if you're starting to have a common language, if you've got a framework for teaching which is multiple, you've got to understand that most people won't know all of it. So some schools have gone for quite a big description, like 5 groups of 5 areas, and each one is 5. That's 25. And each one of those has got 5 steps. You're thinking, let's be realistic. No one's really going to know those 25 techniques inside out. But what you might say is that's our framework. In this year, this academic year, we're going to work on those 3, and we're going to focus on our shared understanding of those 3. The other 25 techniques which describe our teaching learning framework are there, but they're not our focus this year. So your real goal is the shared understanding of 3 or 4 techniques this year or this term. and be as precise as possible. But I think that's the way to do it. There are some there are some really nice examples. I'll show you one that I think is they're quite happy for us to share this one. Yeah, I think I will. Bullbridge.
Sorry, Tom, while you're doing that, I've got to nip off now. I've got a court meeting, but happy to be contactable if you feel that's required to just hand out. Have fun, everyone.
Really, thanks, Fran. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so contact Fran and contact Matt if you want any support. I'll just give you, in answer to this question, let me just show you this example. This is a kind of crazy and brilliant thing at the same time. This is Fulfield School. So they had this framework called Prepare. It's big. If you go to the school, it's all on the big wall. It's huge. They also wanted to include behaviour management. So this is we had joked about how they could call it Prepared with a D for discipline. But the point here is they've got one key technique for each of their main strands. They've got 7 strands of their think teaching, and they've got one core technique. But if I click on this, if I click on, say, assess accurately, what you see there is check for understanding is the main tool for assess accurately, but linked to it, look, are these other areas. So they've said, here's some other things you might explore. On practice purposefully, deliberate vocab development is their main focus. Click on that. There it is, deliberate vocab development. Linked to that are ideas to do with fluency and so on. So they've sort of said, here's the main one and here's some subsidiary ones. And it's all connected to their Prepare sort of motto. And so it's nice, isn't it? They've got a big theme, Prepare, 7 strands of thinking, a key walkthrough for each of the strands, and then linked to that some others. And that's their existing structure. So they took something they already had and made it so the walkthroughs could help them. It's that type of thinking I think is useful. It's intelligent. It's sort of, we can't hold 50 ideas in our head, but they don't vanish. They're there. We just need to be measured about how many things we say is our focus. Okay. All right. Well, look, let's call it quits. Thanks for joining us. Really, really interesting to see so many schools coming to this. And if you want to join us and you haven't yet, then please do. We'd love to have you. And thanks to those schools who are already out there. I recognise some of the names on the call doing the work. Hope you found that useful, and we'll be in touch with you in due course. Thank you so much.